Hello, all. My name is Carol Barnum, and I'm a usability researcher. I have my own company, UX Firm, and I've been in the business of doing usability testing now for 30 years. Most of those as a professor teaching usability testing and also with the usability lab at my university where I worked with clients. And now for the last 12 years as a consultant with my consulting company. As some of you may know, I'm the author of a book called Usability Testing Essentials. And I'm actually working on updates to the 3rd edition right now. I'm going to be talking with you about planning for usability testing, preparing for usability testing, and then testing. So I'm going to be focusing on a couple of chapters in the book. So to start with, you obviously need to plan your usability study. And when you're working with others, that means you need to start with a planning meeting with your team and any of the stakeholders who are involved. So if you have people from the company you're working with who can be there at that meeting, it's really important to get all the stakeholders together so that you can plan the study to match their goals, and if there's money involved, obviously to match their budget and their timeline. And that planning meeting could be as short as an hour, or it could be a half a day, depending upon what you set aside and what time you're able to provide. But in that planning meeting, you would have an agenda, and the agenda would cover the topics that you need to get agreement on. So you would start with what are the goals for your study, and then who are your users? What kinds of tasks do you want your users to be able to perform? What scenarios would those tasks be written into so that it's something normal and natural that they would be able to relate to as they go through the tasks? And how much time is it going to take for them to be able to go through those tasks? So how much time do you need to allocate for each testing session? And if there's any sort of a stipend or an incentive that you're able to offer, maybe not since you're students, but in general, what is the incentive that you're going to need to provide in order to get their commitment to attend your session? Now, when I say attend your session, it could be in person, or it obviously could be remote using something like Zoom, like I'm doing now. So determining all of those things and figuring out what your goals are, what the tasks are, what the scenarios are that those tasks fold into, what the length of a session needs to be. And then, of course, the next question would be, well, how can we create a screener to identify the specific characteristics of the users that we want for this particular study? And the first part in planning is creating that screener. That's something you want to try to accomplish in the planning meeting because it takes the longest period of time in planning to recruit your participants and to get them scheduled for the sessions. And so you want to start with the screener so you all agree on what the characteristics of the users are. And of course, it can't just be, oh, anybody or everybody. So you need to narrow down what the characteristics are of your participants so that, particularly if it's a small study, and I'm a strong proponent of the value of small studies, the critical criterion in a small study is that you have similar users doing the same or similar things with the interface. We'll just say the website for convenience, but it could be an application, it could be a mobile device, it could be anything. So similar users doing similar tasks with the interface. If you recruit people who share those characteristics of knowledge of your product or similar products or experience, then you can get some variety in things like age, ethnicity, gender, and so forth. But the fact that they share a common understanding or lack of understanding of your product or interface is what makes them similar. So you want to try to recruit people who have similar characteristics so that you can do a small study. Once you've identified who they're going to be with the screener, then you have to figure out how you're going to recruit them. Are you going to use social media, for example, which might be a good way to do it? You can certainly reach out to friends and family if they would match the characteristics that you're looking for. But you can use social media to recruit for your study by maybe free participation, but more likely a small incentive, like maybe a $25 gift card if your study is short and remote and easy for them to be able to participate in. It takes more of an incentive if you need them to come to a specific location and if the length of time that they're going to be participating is more than 10 or 15 minutes. So thinking about how you can recruit the participants you are able to recruit for your projects is very important. Then, once you have identified who your users are, what the tasks are, how you're going to recruit them, and perhaps you've even gotten recruiting underway, you want to put together your test plan. So your test plan would be the goals of the study, the description of your users, the tasks and scenarios that they're going to be using in the study, and then whatever measures you're going to use to determine success or failure with the various tasks. So it could be very informal. You just want to get feedback on what works well for your participants and what doesn't. Or it could be more formal, like to rate their sense of the length of time it took to perform certain tasks. Did that take more time, less time, or about the time that you expected? Or you could rate their satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 5. How would you rate your satisfaction with doing that task or with doing all of the tasks, with 1 being not very satisfied and 5 being very satisfied? So you can get qualitative and quantitative ratings or feedback from your participants in the study. And all of that information needs to go into your test plan so that your stakeholders all understand how you're going to do the study, what the goals of the study are, and what the specific parts of the actual usability test are going to entail. And then, of course, for your stakeholders, you want to document how you're going to report the results. So reporting the results could be as simple as just having a stand-up stakeholders meeting and saying, do we all agree these are the things we saw? Or doing a round robin with your stakeholders and basically saying, what was your top finding from this study? What do you think were the positive findings? What do you think were the negative findings that we need to prioritize working on? So you could do it informally in a round robin where everybody who observed can go around and share their findings, or you can do it through your note-taking in the sessions and some informal review of those notes and putting together a bulleted list or a very informal way to present your findings. So you can do that very quickly. You could follow that, depending upon the needs of your stakeholders or your course requirements. You could follow that with a more formal study report in which you either do a slide deck to document what were the goals of the study, what was our methodology, how did we go about doing it, who did we recruit, what were the demographics of our participants, what were our top positive findings, what were our top negative findings, and what recommendations do we have based on the study. So you could do it as a slide deck, you could do it even more formally as a written document, a Word document, again, depending upon the expectations of your stakeholders or the requirements of your course. So all of this goes into your plan, and then following your planning meeting, you flesh out those documents that you need. So you flesh out your screener, you flesh out your test plan or test protocol, as it's more formally called. You write your moderator's guide. which is the script that the person on your team is going to use to moderate the usability sessions. And you have a moderator's guide so that you're sure that everything that you say to each individual is the same from person to person as you move through your participants, or if there's more than one person who's serving in the role as moderator. So you want consistency between your sessions. You do that with a moderator's guide. The moderator's guide could be completely written out, where you just explain that you're reading from a script to make sure that you say the same thing to everybody. Or it can be somewhat less formal with, let's say, a bulleted list of the key points that you want to cover in the session, and you follow that bulleted list in talking through with your participant the topics that you want to make sure that you cover, and the way in which you introduce the scenarios and the questions that you ask between scenarios and at the end of your study. So you develop a formal or informal moderator's guide or moderator's script. The person who's taking notes in your session, if it's not you, if your team member, another team member is designated to be the note taker, then you need a template for the note taker so that one or more people who are in the capacity of taking notes is documenting them in the same way. Or you assign different types of note-taking tasks to different members of your team. So one person may be noting time on task or for a specific scenario. Another person may be noting positive findings. Another person may be noting challenges or difficulties or failures. But typically there is a single template that the note taker uses to either in an Excel spreadsheet or in a Word file or however you may want to document it. Somebody is taking notes, could even be on paper, taking notes during the session so that there is a kind of running review of the issues and the successes that come up during the study. And that way, if you've got good notes, you don't have to go back to the video, because it takes a lot of time to go back and review video if you're not sure what happened. So you use the video, you record the sessions, and of course get permission from your participants to record the sessions. You record the sessions so that if you need to, you can go back and look at any videos where you're not sure what you saw, or there's a difference of opinion about what the team thought they saw for a particular task. But generally speaking, you don't want to take the time to go back to the video. Now, if you've indicated that you're going to provide the video to your stakeholder or to your client, then of course you want to send those video recordings off so that they have them for their own review or for their own internal record keeping. But you want to try to avoid going back to the video because it does take time. So good notes is the way to avoid having to go back to the video. Among the other documents that you need to prepare for your testing session would be a video consent form. There are lots of those available. I have them in my book and on the website, but also you can just Google video consent forms. And basically it's a form that your participants have to sign or agree to. If it's in a remote session and you don't send them the materials ahead, you can ask them in a remote session, do you give us permission to record this session for internal research purposes, and get their verbal okay, at which point you would then start the recording. But in a face-to-face meeting, you would give them the video recording permission form and ask them to review and sign it and date it so that you have a record that they gave you permission to record it. If you were actually working with a product that was in development for a client, you're not doing that. In this case, you might also need a non-disclosure agreement, which is another form that sometimes the client provides that, generally the client provides that, which then indicates that the participants understand that they're not to discuss what they did in the usability session because it's a product under development or it's a product that has not been released to the public. You won't need a non-disclosure form since you're developing your own projects, but that's something to keep in mind for when you're actually doing this for clients. or for your own employer. So those are some of the documents that you need to prepare in advance so that you have them all together in your test plan. Whether you're testing in person, somebody comes to you in a designated room where you have your camera set up and so forth, or whether you're doing this through remote testing like Zoom. You also, of course, need to have in your test plan the qualitative questions that you're going to ask. Could be as general as, so how did that go for you? Or what do you think is the best thing about the product? Or what do you think is the part of the product that needs, attention? Or if you had 3 wishes, what would you do? Those are just sort of general qualitative kinds of questions that you might ask in usability testing. But then, of course, you can also ask those questions that can be quantified, which are rating scales, such as rate your satisfaction or rate your sense of how long this task took in terms of your expectations. You can use standard questions like the system usability scale, which is probably the most widely used standard 10-question questionnaire. I have information about that in the book Usability Testing Essentials, but you can also find information about that in an internet search. And using a standardized questionnaire like the system usability scale allows you to measure the compiled number that you get from all of your participants against a lot of benchmarks, because there have been meta-studies of using the meta-studies of the analysis of using the system usability scale, so that you know whether your participants' average score is above or below the general passing score of 61 out of 100. So you can also use it if you were doing a series of studies to see if you can improve that score over time just for your own product or your own interface. Those are some of the things you need to do to prepare in advance and to get ready to test. And then, of course, when you're testing, if it's in person, you want to greet the participant. Of course, you do this in an online format as well, like Zoom, but you want to greet the participant. You want to try to make them feel comfortable in the situation by engaging in a little small talk at the beginning. You want to explain exactly what's going to happen and the time that you're available. If you're in a remote session and you need them to you need to share your screen to show them something, or you need them to share their screen, you want to discuss all of that and how that will take place. You want to, if you're in a remote situation, you want to talk about who your observers are so that they know that other people may be observing in the session. And then you want to go through the preliminaries of getting their permission, asking them if they have any questions, and also explaining to them how you would like for them to think out loud, not talk out loud, because that's what I'm doing right now, but think out loud, which means to have them share their thoughts with you as they're engaging with the interface and as they're going through the tasks and the scenarios. And the benefit of having them think out loud is that you not only observe what they do, but you understand what they're thinking about what they're doing and what they like or don't like, or what problems or issues they may be having. Some people are very comfortable with think out loud and they just chatter away to you, and that's wonderful. Other people need a bit more encouragement. So if you have somebody who doesn't naturally want to think out loud while they're performing the tasks, at the end of the first task, which usually should be short to give you the opportunity to come back in again, you might say, really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Remember to try to think out loud as you're going through, because that'll really be helpful to us. And give them an example. Say, I like this because, or I'm having trouble with that, or I'm not sure where I would go to find, the goal or the task that you're asking me to perform. And then that encourages them to continue to think out loud. So that covers how to prepare for testing and how to get into testing. And There are some other things that you might want to consider. So if you're in person, for example, you want to be careful about your body language because you don't want to indicate that you're very positive about something that they've done or very negative about something that they've done. So you want to keep your body language very neutral. You want your observers, if they're in the same room, to also keep their body language very neutral. If you're in a remote situation, for example, you want to observe your participants' body language, whether it's in person or in a remote situation. But again, also keep your body language very neutral. And when you ask questions of your participants, you want to keep those very neutral as well. So one of the suggestions I have in my book is that you want to try to avoid questions that start with why. Like, why did you do that? Because as you might imagine, that suggests to the participant that maybe they did something wrong, and you do not want to put your participant on the defensive. So instead of saying, why did you do that? You might want to say, tell us about this situation where I observed that you were doing so-and-so. Help us understand what your thinking process was at that point. And that keeps it very neutral, it keeps it very open, and it doesn't put the participant on the spot. So you want to try to avoid asking questions that would sound critical and ask questions that stay very neutral and very open. Also, you might say, well, what if the participant is really struggling? You know, how do I help the participant? Well, you do want to observe the participant struggling because that's real world, but you don't want them to struggle too long. So of course, too long is, you know, what does that exactly mean? So I would say that what you want to do is kind of observe the frustration level of your participant or listen to the kinds of thinking out loud comments that they make to you, and then perhaps encourage them to try just a bit longer and then say, okay, that's great. We learned what we needed to learn. We really appreciate your showing us how that went for you. Now let's move on to the next task. So again, you want to balance how long you want to watch somebody doing something that's difficult for them and when you want to intervene. Also, you want to avoid answering questions that they might ask, like, has everybody had a problem with this? Or how do other people do in this study? So it makes no difference. You should communicate that it makes no difference what anybody else has done because everybody's experience is unique to them. And that's what you want to learn in the study. So just say, this is great. We're learning so much from you. This is what it's about. You know, thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. And you can answer questions, but it's best to try to hold questions until the very end. So say, I would like to tell you about that, but let's wait until the end, and so that we don't, you know, provide information you might not get if you were working on your own, and then I'll answer any questions that you have at the end. So I've quickly reviewed how to plan your study from the point of the planning meeting, how to develop the documents that you're going to need, starting with your screener and then going through the other documents that you're going to need for your study, how to set up and engage with your participants in these one-on-one sessions for usability testing. Again, small studies are great if you're recruiting people who have similar understanding of the of other products or lack of understanding, that so that they come to your interface, your design, with the same sort of background information. That allows you to do small studies. But what if you get an outlier? So what if you have 5 participants in your study and one of them was very different or had a very different experience for one scenario or one set of tasks? What do you do about that? Well, if you're only looking at 5 people, you're talking about 20% of the users that you looked at. So you want to examine what happened with the outlier. You want to look back at the screener and see if that person was representative of the user population that you were recruiting. And you want to determine whether the outlier is representative of a portion of the population and therefore there is validity in it, or whether there was something particular about that particular thing that basically say, well, that wouldn't happen to other people. So the team needs to discuss the outliers, if there are any, and basically say, yeah, we think that was a finding. We only saw it one time out of 5, but we know that would come up again if we looked at 20 people or 30 people. And so we do want to include that in our findings. And then, of course, when you get to your findings and you report them, however you're going to report them, you want to prioritize what can be done now, which is frequently called low-hanging fruit. What can we do now? Little development costs and, something that could be fixed very easily. And what is more long-term that we kind of need to set aside for more resources or more time. And so you can prioritize your findings that way with what can be done now and what needs to be done later. Or you can prioritize your findings with what is the most significant thing we found, whether it needs to be done now or later. We've got to address that. And then how do we sort of back off in our severity to the things that might be cosmetic and that would be nice to do if we have time, but that aren't critical. So the critical findings may receive priority for doing, whether it's something easy to do or difficult to do. Of course, you want to be able to decide how you're going to rank your findings and how you're going to present them. And then, of course, you do want to make recommendations either to your own team or to your stakeholders, because they don't just want to know what happened, but they want to know, based on what happened, what do you think should be done about it? And sometimes if you're the designers and the developers, the recommendations will be very specific. We need to change this screen. We need to change this navigation flow. We need to address the mental model issues, which is it doesn't work the way the participant expected it to work. But sometimes your recommendations are to your stakeholders and you're not the subject matter expert. So they would be, the recommendations would be more general, like you need to address this problem in navigation, but basically let them decide how they want to address it. And either way, you do need to include recommendations in your report, informal or formal. So that's kind of a very quick overview without it being able to engage and hear your questions and talk further on how to plan for a usability study, prepare for it with the documents that you need, recruit the participants, conduct the testing in person or remotely, and report the findings, do the analysis and report the findings. I hope you find this helpful. Good luck with your projects.